In this video, we will go over how to configure deep packet inspection on a FortiGate firewall. We'll go over some examples. We'll talk a bit about performance, and we'll also go over how to configure our own custom certificate and have that pushed via GPO in a Windows environment. So let's get into it. Okay, so it starts with looking at our SSL inspection profile. So if we go to our SSL inspection profile, let's take a look at deep inspection, which should be there by default. We'll see that it's a read-only profile, but let's just click into it. So full SSL inspection must be enabled if we want to do deep packet inspection. If just SSL certificate inspection were to be enabled, then the firewall is not going to do a deep inspection functionality on every single HTTPS packet that matches the firewall policy that this security profile is associated with. So full SSL inspection needs to be enabled, and as we can see here, Fortinet CA SSL is the certificate that we are identifying. Notice how there's only one certificate that's here by default. So let's take a look at that certificate. So we can access it by going to System, Certificates, and let's see, Fortinet CA SSL. So as we can see here is that this is a self-signed certificate. So we can see the FortiGate serial number. And then this will actually be on this unit by default. If you were to, for example, factory reset this firewall, this self-signed certificate is going to already be installed on the FortiGate. So let's go back to that section, SSH inspection. Let's just clone this profile. We'll clone it so that we get read-write access. So let's just call it TTP DPI. All right. Now let's go to our firewall policy. In this case, we're going to use our Internet All firewall policy. It's pretty straightforward. There's no configuration on it currently. And let's change our inspection profile to TTP DPI. Now, for this actually to work, we do have to have a security profile additionally enabled. So let's enable antivirus, we'll enable web filter and application control to start. Okay, now let's go onto the client and access a web browser and see what it looks like. Okay, so let's access google.com. As we can see, when we access any website, now we're going to get a certificate warning, and that's because the FortiGate is actually applying deep inspection. So obviously this would not be realistic for our end users to have to see this message every single time they're accessing a website. So what we would have to do now is, let's actually, before we do anything, let's just take a quick look at the certificate just to get an idea of what it looks like. So as we can see in the certificate, when we're accessing google.com, we're actually seeing that the issuer of the server certificate, which is being presented to the client, is actually the FortiGate serial number, and that's expected right now. So to prevent this warning, we have to go to the firewall policy, just double check that security profile, and then the certificate that's assigned to the deep inspection profile, we need to download that, bring it over to the client and have it installed. Okay, so now that we have the certificate on the client, let's just open it. We'll install the certificate. We'll place it in the Trusted Root Certificate Authority store. There we go. Okay, now let's just, we might have to exit out of this Chrome browser. Let's go back in. Okay, perfect. So we no longer actually get that certificate warning anymore because we trust that certificate. So let's just double check the certificate. There we go. So now we can confirm that there is a trust relationship there. Now, just a quick note here, you may notice that sometimes when you're accessing certain websites, or maybe particularly when you're using Google Chrome, you may notice that, okay, the FortiGate doesn't seem to actually be taking the deep inspection action. One thing to double check is to make sure that the Google protocol called QUIC is not actually interfering with the FortiGate's deep inspection abilities. Why I mention this is because by default, Google Chrome will try to use QUIC as the protocol for communication, especially with Google applications. But then if you do want to have QUIC disabled, the FortiGate can assist you with that. So either on the application control profile or on the firewall policy, this can be done. So first, with the application control profile, if you see QUIC here is set to block. So that's going to ensure that QUIC cannot be used on from the clients. Alternatively, you could create a new firewall policy that is from, in my case, internal to WAN 1. I'll just call it block QUIC. We'll make the source all, destination all, for example. The service will be, we're going to block UDP 443, and we're going to block UDP 80. Okay, so make sure that policy is enabled, and then we just have to ensure that it gets matched first. And then, sorry, actually, I need to make sure that we actually we deny that traffic. There we go. And we make sure that it's above the policy that we'd usually be matching there. Additionally, one thing that I want to mention is that when we are looking at our security profile for SSL inspection, there's a section called Exempt from SSL Inspection, and this you will probably need to use this at some point too, because there's certain applications that may become privy to the fact that the FortiGate would be doing deep inspection or this man-in-the-middle behavior, and because of that, it may prevent the particular application from not working. So in that case, you may need to consider exempting certain applications from SSL inspection to make sure that the application works. Now, obviously, this means that the FortiGate doesn't get that full visibility for that particular application, but there's really no other way around it, because then the application will be prevented from working without that exemption. All right, so let's go over some examples of how SSL deep inspection helps us out on the firewall, starting with downloading a virus from an SSL encrypted website. So if I click this virus download, let's see. Okay, now the FortiGate has visibility to it and it's able to stop that virus download. In this case, I'm just downloading from a test website, like a test virus, so it's not actually harmful. But the point is that we're able to download a virus. The firewall now has visibility to it, even though the URL was using HTTPS, and the firewall was actually able to block this. And when we look at the antivirus logs, we get to see all of the specifics about that particular event. All right, another example would be application control. So if we go to our application sensor or application control profile, if we try and add an application and filter override, before we even search for a specific application, we'll be able to see that there are many different applications that have this lock symbol, which means that the only way that the FortiGate firewall is able to identify that particular application is by having that deep inspection visibility to the traffic. So let's use a YouTube example. Maybe for whatever reason in our network we have some reason to not to allow people to access YouTube, but then not to actually play those videos. So if we add an application override and we say, okay, we just want to block that access, because we have the visibility to that traffic, we can actually now see when a user actually clicks the play button after they've accessed YouTube. So let's go ahead and apply that, and then let's go to the client and let's test it out now. All right, and now when we click on a YouTube video, as we can see, it's not actually loading up that YouTube video. So now let's go back to the firewall and take a look at the logs. Okay, when referring to the application control logs, as we can see, there we have it. YouTube video play has been successfully blocked based on our configuration, and that's the reason why we couldn't actually play any YouTube videos. Also, just another cool thing to kind of mention here is that because we have this deep inspection visibility to videos that we are actually able to play once we actually remove that rule that I just created, we can actually see the name of the video that we've accessed. We can see information about even the channel that we're accessing, and there's a lot more information that we have visibility to now as well. And let's take it to the next example too. Is if we wanted to maybe block access to a certain channel or a category of YouTube videos, we can also do that with a video filter. So let's go configure that now too. All right, so let's say that we want to block this channel of my YouTube channel, so To The Point Fortinet. We could take that channel ID, and then we would go to our policy here. let's enable video filter, and then we'll save that. I've already pre-configured this video filter, but let's just take a quick look at the configuration. So as we can see, that channel ID ends with MG. I've had that blocked. You can also block full categories or make changes on those categories, but in this case, I've just blocked the channel ID. Again, it ends with MG, same as what we're seeing here. All right, so the end result here is that now when we actually click that channel, we try and reach it, we actually can't access it. All right, so another thing that we can do with the web filter and deep inspection being enabled is we could configure what's called a content filter. So with this content filter that I'm creating right now, if the words testing 1, 2, 3 are seen in the communication to that HTTPS server, or any HTTPS server based on this firewall policy, then it's going to be blocked. So let's test it now on the client. All right, let's type in testing 1, 2, 3. And there we have it. We can see that we've been blocked based off of a banned word, which is that content filter configuration. Now back to the web filter log, we can see that that URL was blocked because of the banned word testing 1, 2, 3. Now another item that we might want to do with a web filter is enable safe search. So in this case, let's actually go to the security profiles web filter profile here. This default profile that we've been using so far, let's clone it, and let's just go, we'll just call it default 2. Okay, there we go. So we have default 2. And the reason why I cloned that is because in this case, we're going to actually have to change the feature set from flow to proxy based if we haven't already had that configured on our profile. So we change it to proxy, and then now we can see that there's an option that allows us to enable safe search on Google, Yahoo, Bing, and Yandex. So let's just enable that. And then once enabled, let's go to our FortiGate's firewall policy and let's enable that. Okay, there we go. Now how this feature works is, let's use Google as an example. If we're typing in a search term and let's say we're looking for images, right? Automatically in the URL, there's going to be the following that's entered, right? So the search safe equals active, right? So if we did not enable safe search like we just did a moment ago, then we wouldn't actually see this get automatically entered and hard coded into the URL. Now, I'm just using just a regular test term here, search, but if somebody were to, put in something that's a little bit, they're looking for something graphic or something along those lines, something that is not appropriate. Now the actual Google safe search would be protecting that user from being able to access explicit resources and things like that. All right, so I think that covers a good starting set of different features that we can enable. There definitely are more that we have access to with deep inspection, but again, this is just a start. So now let's get into a couple other items. So one quick note I want to make here is about performance on the FortiGate. So when we're doing something like deep inspection, just the involvement of being able to decrypt this communication and have visibility into that payload. There's a lot of CPU cycles and load that usually requires, right? So just keep that in mind when you're deploying this, is maybe deploy it with a phased approach instead of just deploying it to like a whole entire enterprise at one time, just to make sure that your resource utilization on the firewall is not going to be too heavily burdened. But yeah, one advantage that you do have if you are going with a FortiGate firewall is, there's SPU technology, which helps alleviate a lot of load off of the CPU. So you can definitely push this box, a lot harder than you would be able to if it didn't have that hardware acceleration technology. But overall, just keep that in mind, that we are adding more resource utilization, even though we get that visibility and that extra security. Just keep in mind the performance of the firewall too. So let's go into this SSL inspection profile again. As we can see here, is we're using this the default self-signed certificate that gets created by the FortiGate firewall. Now this is absolutely secure, but maybe you'd like to actually import your own certificate that's been created from a third-party CA. That can absolutely be done. So in this case, I'll be using FortiAuthenticator as the third-party CA. You absolutely do not have to use FortiAuthenticator. You could use something like Microsoft Certificate Authority, or maybe use a Linux machine to create a certificate. But the idea here is that we need to create what's called an intermediate certificate. So now we'll just go to the FortiAuthenticator and configure that. All right, so on the FortiAuthenticator, I already have my root CA certificate. The certificate ID is TTP Fortinet. And then, let's just quickly click it just so you can get an idea as to how it's configured. So what we want to do is we want to use this root certificate authority to actually create an intermediate certificate for us. All right, and how we do that is let's go create new, and then we'll select intermediate CA. As we can see, the certificate authority is already specifying the one that we want, which is TTP Fortinet. That's the root CA that's going to sign this certificate. Let's just call this TTP Fortinet Inter for intermediate, right? And then we'll just name it the same thing here. In your case, you can fill out all this stuff, but we'll just proceed. All right, there we have it. So now we have the root CA there again, and then we also have the intermediate CA that we just configured. So now let's export the key and the cert. What this means is let's export both the private and the public key. So I'm going to associate a password with this exported certificate. And then I'm going to click download the PKCS12 file. On the FortiGate, we will go import certificate, PKCS12, we'll upload, and then we'll put in the same password that we just had on the FortiAuthenticator. And let's click create. Perfect. Okay, so we have successfully imported the certificate. And there we have it. So it will be under the local certificate section. Now let's go to our security profiles, SSL SSH Inspection, TTY DPI, and then now let's swap out the Fortinet _CA _SSL certificate with TTP Fortinet Inter.P12. Now, if you don't actually see this option showing up here, there likely is some type of misconfiguration that happened while exporting that certificate. So hopefully this works out for you, but if not, it's likely going to be that certificate hasn't been exported properly. But in this case, we'll just proceed with our configuration. There we have it. So TTP DPI, which has previously been assigned with TTP DPI here on this firewall policy. Now we have that new certificate that's been uploaded. So when we access our client machine again, we're going to start seeing some certificate warnings as expected. And there we have it. That's what we're seeing on the client. All right, so we could repeat the process that we've done before and manually install this certificate to avoid these certificate warnings and have deep inspection working at the same time. But in this case, let's go over a use case that a lot of us will have in a Windows environment where we want to actually push this certificate to our end devices. So let's hop onto the Windows server now. Oh, and just one more thing, let's actually export this certificate. If we go download here, okay, and now let's take this downloaded certificate and bring it onto our Windows server. And the reason why we're essentially downloading the same certificate is that to import this certificate to the FortiGate, we needed to have both the public and the private key. But then the actual public key is the only thing that the clients are going to need, so there's no point in putting the private key onto the Windows Server machine that's going to deploy this via GPO. We just need the public key, and the way we can get that is just by clicking the download option on the FortiGate. All right, so now we have access to our Windows Server. Here's the intermediate certificate. Let's just quickly click on that. Okay, so we see that there's, the intermediate certificate here, and then we also see the CA certificate, which signed that. Again, both of these were configured on the FortiAuthenticator. Let's just take a quick second and also get a copy of that CA certificate. We'll just call this, we'll just call it TTP Fortinet CA. All right, there we go. Okay, perfect. So our root certificate, and then we also have the intermediate certificate. We need both of these and have those pushed via GPO. All right, so let's configure group policy now. So let's go to group policy management. We'll edit the default domain policy. We'll go to computer configuration policies, Windows settings, security settings, public key policies, trusted root certificate authorities, and then let's import from the local machine the following two files. So we'll start with the CA certificate. Perfect. We'll do the same thing. And both will be going in the trusted root certificate authorities store. There we have it. All right. Now let's go back to our client machine. All right, so to get the workstation to reach out to the server for a GPO update, I'm just restarting the machine and we'll come back in a moment. All right, so let's first check to make sure that the client has received that GPO push with those two certificates. So we'll go to mmc.exe and then let's add a new snap-in for a computer account. And then we go to the trusted root certificate authorities. And then there we have it. The root CA and the intermediate CA have been installed. Now let's access a website. All right, there we have it. So we don't have that certificate warning anymore, and the intermediate certificate is the one that's handling the deep inspection now. All right, so hopefully this video has been of some value to you. Thanks for joining in here, and we'll see you in the next video.